So when I first arrived here, everybody, a lot of the people that lived here especially, it was like, okay, how did you end up coming from California to Jaén, which is this random small town in Spain? So you probably already know that there are tons, hundreds of thousands possibly of people moving from particularly the United States to Spain and moving to places like Madrid, Barcelona, Valencia, and all of those cities are great. However, when I moved to Spain, I moved to a smaller city called Cartagena, and then I've spent the past 5 years living in another small town called Jaén. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about what brought me here, why I chose to stay in a smaller city, even though at one point in time I did want to move to a bigger city, and what it's really like living in a smaller town, in a small, well, what it's really like living in a smaller Spanish city versus more of the metropolitan cities, what I like, what I miss about bigger cities, and pretty much why I stayed where I am. And make sure you stick to the end because if you're planning on moving abroad, I'm going to give you some tips on how to decide what type of city you prefer would be best for you to move to, whether you need the bigger city or maybe you're ready to check out smaller, peaceful way of living by moving to a smaller city. Anyways, let's talk about where I live. So Jaén is the name of the province, but it's also the name of the capital city. And it has about 112,000 people living in the capital as of, I think, 2025. If you've never heard of this city before, it is okay. Most people haven't. And the people, and it actually, if you ask most Spaniards, or at least most of the Spaniards that I've run into outside of Jaén, it doesn't have the best reputation. And I still have not figured out exactly why. So, give you a little bit of context when it comes to size. So, Madrid has about 3.4 million people that live in the capital. So, 3.4 million in comparison to 112,000, there's definitely a size difference. And Jaén is a place, so it's a smaller city, obviously, but it is most known for olive oil. And I believe that the province of Jaén is one of the largest producers of olive oil in Europe, and a lot of the olive oil that you might buy in other regions or other countries like Italy actually come from this region. And so it has over 6 million olive trees, and which makes for a beautiful scenery. You can drive in almost any part of the province and you're just going to have this beautiful scenery of olive trees, fields and fields, endless sea of olive trees. And it's great. It's beautiful. I love it. And I don't, maybe that's one of the reasons why it has such a bad or misinformed reputation, because a lot of people say like, oh, there's nothing there but olive trees. Yes, we have a lot of olive trees, but there's so much more to Jaén, the capital, and just the province in itself that really make it a really magical place. I originally moved to Jaén as part of the language assistant program, and I came during the pandemic or towards the end of the pandemic. Yeah, it was like the second year of the pandemic. And so when I came, it was like a weird introduction because a lot of things were still closed, not everything was still open. Like the life here hadn't revived. So it was a little bit of a weird introduction, but I was meeting people and I was making friends and I liked it my first year, and I was working in a great school. So the second year came and I was like, I'm gonna stick it out. I'm gonna see what it's like after, post pandemic when, things are actually opening up and there's life and things. And the more that I experienced the city, the more I really appreciated it, and the more I really started enjoying it and finding things that I loved and things that I liked. Like when I think my second year in Jaén, I started Cuban salsa classes and had a great group of of and knew a great group of people from my salsa class, And I even performed at a Latin dance conference. And there was also a Latin dance conference, so that was really cool. The nature here is spectacular, and I love one of the things that I really really love about living in Haiyan is that I'm so close to nature that I can literally, walk 15 minutes and be on a trail that's taking me through olive trees and through the mountains. And as a person that loves nature, that's really important to me, to be able, as someone who grew up in the city, grew up, who grew up in like constant noise and busyness, having easy access to nature is definitely a luxury that I consider I have, that I didn't have before when I was living in California. I mean, I could drive to nature, and I, would hike in California, but it's different when you can just walk somewhere. And that's also another thing I really like about Haiyan. It is very, very walkable. A lot of cities, I think, in Spain are very walkable, but it makes you appreciate and makes you slow down when you have to walk somewhere versus when you're always just like getting in your car and going somewhere. So that's something that I really like, and what helped me to stay not only after the first year, but the second year and then the third year. And then something happened, I think, my fourth year. Because my fourth year, I think I was getting to the point of, okay, I think that I want, to live in a bigger city. I think I want to return to, the city life, because I feel like at heart, I am a city girl. And I was kind of getting that itch of like, what's out there. And at the time, I was visiting Valencia almost every year, and I had met friends there, and I loved going to the beach, and I just really loved my experiences in Valencia. And I was like, I think that is the place that I want to live. And, especially too when I was younger, or in this time of my life, I was used to being on the move. I was used to kind of going from city to city and trying, new things out. But then something happened that made me stay. Two, I think, pivotal things that really made me say, like, okay, even though it would be nice to live in a big city and there's things that I miss from a big city, I do think that, for right now, I do think that Haiyan is, the place where I'm meant to stay or meant to plant roots. And the first thing was moving from a student visa to an autonomous visa or a freelance visa. That was probably one of the that really influenced me staying in Haiyan, mostly because if you know anything about moving to Spain, you know that the bureaucracy and the paperwork is just a headache and a half, and it's complicated, and mix-ups happen all the time. And so it's easier, and it's somewhat easier, I think, when you're filing your paperwork and you're changing over your visa. Any type of paperwork, I feel like it's a little bit easier when you do it in a smaller city, because obviously there's just less people, there's less paperwork to process, so things can get done faster. And also too, when I was changing over my student visa to an autonomous visa, I found this great organization called CADE, which actually helps people become entrepreneurs and freelancers. And I think it's more specific in Andalusia, the region that I'm in. And they might have other types of organizations in other parts of Spain, but knowing that I could, actually get support from an organization, and I wouldn't have to like hire a lawyer, and I wouldn't have to, do extra stuff. And it was just nice having that support. And I started having, and the more that I stayed in Haiyan, the more I started creating community, and the more I started doing things that I loved. And the more Haiyan started, in a way, it kind of felt like Haiyan was gifting me these things that I loved. So I mentioned that I started with salsa, and then I was introduced to these like Latin dance nights where I could go. And what I love about these Latin dance nights is when I started going, it's because they would start at like 5 in the afternoon, 5, 6 in the afternoon, and then or wait, yeah, 5, 6 in the afternoon, and they would go to like 9 or 10, which is like perfect for me because Spanish nightlife can sometimes start at like 1, 2 in the morning, which is just way too late for me. So I could go out, dance, have a good time, and then come back, have dinner, take a shower, go to bed. And it was perfect. So I had dance, and then I also found flamenco, started flamenco classes. And I was, I could go hiking. It was all these things that really filled my life with joy. Were happening, and I started pursuing out, because Haiyan has a lower cost of living comparison to the bigger cities. It was easier to start my own business, to start my freelance writing business, and to work from home because the cost of living was lower. So it had all these things were kind of coming together and kind of telling me like, maybe I should stay put. Valencia is still there. I can still go there. I can still visit, but maybe this is where I'm supposed to plant roots. And then the one thing that kind of really made me say this is where I'm going to stay is I met my now current partner. So honestly, I feel a little bit silly like saying I stayed here for a guy. But in a different perspective, or different point of view, I'm glad that I stayed for, even though it's for a guy, because I'm very happy with my partner, and being able to start a relationship and find someone that's going to support you through life, through journey. And my partner has been any major transition that I've had in my life in the past like 2.5, 3 years. My partner has been there for me, and so I didn't. Long distance is just hard. Kudos to anybody that does long distance. I'm not saying it couldn't have worked if we did long distance, but it would have been definitely harder. I stayed with my partner, and that ended up propelling me to move in with my partner, who lives in a city right outside of Haiyan capital called Los Villares, and that's where I currently live now. And Los Villares it is definitely smaller than Haiyan. All honest, and transparent, there are things that I miss. About living in a bigger city or living in a different place. So even though I think Haiyan does have a lot of different things going on when it comes to entertainment, shows to go to, not as frequently as some other areas like Granada or Sevilla, but there's entertainment. Like there are events happening. Even last month we have our festivals, we have our ferias. There are things one can entertain themselves in Haiyan. But the thing that I miss is the entertainment is not as constant, I think, as a bigger city. I feel like in bigger cities, there is that magic, that pool where you can kind of just go out without plans, really, and find yourself in something. And there's just constant entertainment, so even, every weekend you can, do different things. I remember when I was on a press trip to Madrid, I met someone that lives in Madrid, and she was mentioning how, every weekend she goes out to a new restaurant just because, there's so many choices, there's so much variety. So we do sometimes miss the variety, especially when it comes to maybe the cuisine. I definitely have, me and my partner definitely have our favorite spots where we go. I love going back to places, don't get me wrong, I love repeating and going back to places, but sometimes it's nice to just have a little bit more variety, which we don't always have, but that's okay. I've learned to accept that, and I've learned to just take advantage when I go to a bigger city, when I go to Madrid or places like that. I'm definitely, I take advantage. I also too want to say, I haven't been to that many. Honestly, I do say like I miss like better like nightclubs. I say that with a little bit of hesitation because I feel like when I was in California, I was very selective of the nightclubs that I would go to. But when you go out, you can go out dancing here, genuinely. We have, I think, 2 major nightclubs, 2 or 3, and places where you can go when it's like playing music. But that music you're going to hear is going to be reggaeton, which I'm a fan of like old school reggaeton. This new stuff, not really my jam, but definitely something that I miss, being able to go to a nightclub and being able to listen to and dance to other music that's not reggaeton. So, I'm back. If you made it this far, back with different clothes because my previous video didn't record, so don't worry, this is not an AI clone. But if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. Now, I'm going to go over some tips for you if you are thinking about moving abroad and how to figure out exactly what kind of city or what kind of area you want to live in. What's your must-have? So what is something that you must have in a city in order to live there, in order for it to feel like home or to feel comfortable? That could be things like community or being close to a mall or having a lively nightlife, or not having a lively nightlife. You might want a place that's actually very quiet. You want to consider your cost of living. So considering what it's actually going to cost you to live in a certain city, or what is the city or town, what is the rent like, what are the groceries like, what are the costs of transportations, things like that are very important to consider when thinking about moving abroad. This next thing I don't really hear a lot of people talking about, I don't think a lot of people consider, is the holidays and events that happen within the city that you are wanting to move to. For example, I mentioned that I wanted to move to Valencia, and they have a yearly festival called Fallas, and even though I haven't experienced it myself yet, I have heard many things about it, and it is pretty much the time of the year when almost everybody is partying like day and night. There's loud music, there's fireworks, there are these large, really interesting parades with these very intricate and very beautiful floats that end up being burned at the end of the parade. And so all of this, it provokes a lot of partying and drinking, and it's just kind of a hot mess and a fun festival to experience if you're visiting. But if you're living in a city and having to experience the loud music and the nonstop partying, it could be a hard adjustment. So considering the connectivity, if you're moving particularly to a smaller city, considering the connectivity of that city or that town to bigger cities, especially the connectivity to airports and or train stations and things like that, because it's particularly to the airport, especially if you're someone that plans on going back to your hometown to visit, or if you just like to travel, making sure that you can easily get to an airport or getting to a different destination, whether by train or by bus, because connectivity is important, and especially even in emergencies, you want to make sure that you can get to where you need in time. So, thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful or maybe a little interesting. And if you want to continue to hear more about my life, or just random interesting facts about what it's like living in Spain, or need help moving abroad, particularly getting your finances together so that you can move abroad, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. And also, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you like reading about stories abroad, if you like reading text as well as video watching, then you can subscribe to my Substack, link in the description. And if you want more tips on how to better manage your money, whether it is to move abroad or travel more or buy something big and fancy, then make sure you subscribe to my email list, also linked in the description. Ciao for now.